my girlfriend. Previously this person lived next to us, but was taken into custody and was now looking for temporary housing for several weeks. I often wondered why he was constantly lingering next to me and my girlfriend. After I threw him out of the apartment, he began to suddenly appear in different places where we happened to be, and I had to question who informed him of our whereabouts. I had a creepy feeling that he had something like a GPS tracker, as if he was constantly monitoring our every move. I often wondered who could have informed him of our presence in that particular place. But finally the truth became known, and everything fell into place. It happened one morning when I had just finished taking a shower and was going to work. At the same time, my girlfriend was taking a shower. Suddenly I heard a signal coming from her phone, which indicated the arrival of a new text message. In a normal situation, such a notification would not have aroused my interest. But considering that my girlfriend recently purchased a new phone, an unfamiliar ringtone caught my attention. I took the phone from the nightstand and looked at the sender of the message. It was Patrick, my former roommate, recently released from prison. Our friendship was born in high school when we both grew up in Queens. In those years we had a lot of common memories and experiences. Patrick lived with me for a few months before his imprisonment, but everything changed when my girlfriend moved in with me. After his release, he returned and stayed with us for another 2 months. Unfortunately, there was a rift between us, and I decided to kick him out. Initially, it was assumed that he would stay with us for only 2 weeks. Initially, he intended to find his own housing or move in with relatives, but what was supposed to be a temporary agreement for 2 weeks eventually stretched out for 2 months. Paying almost $2,000 for a cramped 2-bedroom apartment in New York was already difficult enough. The lack of personal space was also a serious problem, since I could not freely communicate with my girlfriend due to the fact that he was sleeping on the next sofa in the living room. In January, it was planned to conclude a new lease agreement and move to a more expensive apartment in a better area. In the coming month, my girlfriend will have the opportunity to joyfully welcome her family and friends to our apartment without experiencing the slightest embarrassment. It is important to note that Patrick and my girlfriend did not have a strong relationship. Moreover, she supported me when I made the decision to ask him to leave. They met quite recently when I allowed him to temporarily stay with us until he finds another place to live. So, I was stunned when I discovered that he had been texting her that morning. I didn't even know they were texting. A notification appeared on my phone screen indicating their communication. You see, my name is Caleb. My girlfriend and I were acquainted with a certain Patrick, and it was very unlikely that she knew anyone else with that name. Moreover, the fact that her friend Patrick, whom I didn't know about, was asking about another Caleb, looked like an extraordinary coincidence. It became clear to me that in fact she was corresponding with my previous neighbor, whom I evicted from the apartment 2 weeks ago because of his long stay. I could not imagine that there was any connection between my girlfriend and Patrick, especially since she supported my decision to cut him out of our lives. However, the feeling of anxiety remained, hinting that something was wrong. The thought of romance was the furthest thing from me. Perhaps they just went outside together to smoke. Or just Patrick treated her to light illegal substances. He had a lot of potential for other pursuits, but he stubbornly believed that someday he could become a rapper. Fixated on spending money on studio time, he never gets distracted by something else. Whenever he is fired from a fast food chain, or from the warehouse where he works, he returns to the streets to engage in street trading of illegal substances. But even in this case he is unsuccessful. He is constantly caught and imprisoned for short terms. This cycle repeats endlessly. Now let me give you a picture. I grew up in a predominantly deprived area of Queens, where my parents, fortunately, are still happily married. As a child, I constantly had to face financial difficulties, but I can't remember a time when I went to bed hungry. I am immensely grateful that I grew up among a diverse society that introduced me to different cultures. During my formative years, my circle of friends consisted mainly of people of African descent. Accordingly, I did not assume that I would have a relationship with a person of another race, since all my previous girlfriends were African American. But fate decreed otherwise, when about a year and a half ago, working as a courier, I met my current girlfriend. At first we talked, exchanging witty remarks, and I jokingly asked her out on a date, fully expecting that I would be refused. I became a delivery driver, which eventually led me to meet her. We agreed on a date, and this was the beginning of our relationship. She is an amazing young specialist in her early 20s, with an elegant figure that perfectly emphasizes her beauty. At the time of our acquaintance, she lived with a neighbor in an elite area. As for me, I am a simple person who does not need much in life, enough money to pay for an apartment, and a devoted girl who does not cheat on me while I work tirelessly. At first, I thought I had found it all in my current girlfriend, and I sincerely treasured the time we spent together. After 7 months of dating, I reached the point of complete trust in her. It seemed to me that it was with her that I could build a stable future. This meant that I could stop spending my hard-earned money on expensive dates, bars, and clubs. At the time, I had a roommate named Patrick, but the lease only listed my name. Due to his poor creditworthiness and lack of rental history, Patrick could not be included in the agreement. But my lease ended after 8 months, and my girlfriend's contract was tied to her neighbor's contract. We both agreed to find new housing in a more attractive area. In about 4 months, when her lease expires, we will make a significant step forward in our joint plans by moving in together. She expressed a desire to live in an area similar to her current one, in the East Village or the Lower East Side, as they seem more attractive to her. On the other hand, I currently live in the Washington Heights neighborhood, which she doesn't really like. Fortunately, her workplace is located in the East Village, so it is quite consistent with her desire to live near work. My job as a delivery driver does not require me to prioritize my choice of place of residence. But, considering the financial aspect, I had to consider the apartment my partner wanted to move into. It was estimated to cost about $1,500 more than the apartment I created with my friend Patrick. The cost of renting a one-bedroom apartment was approximately $3,500. We planned that she would temporarily move in with me and my neighbor as soon as her contract with the current neighbor expired. After the expiration of my contract, we would be able to move into the apartment that she looked after. From the age of 16, Patrick dreamed of becoming famous in the music industry, but so far, he has not been lucky. Despite the fact that Patrick invested all his financial resources in studio sessions, his music remained almost unheard, and he was disappointed to get into a seemingly endless cycle. Patrick has never taken any of his side jobs seriously, preferring to buy and sell illegal drugs. Because of this, he failed random tests for the use of prohibited substances and eventually lost his job, which led to constant delays in paying for the apartment. Unfortunately, I allowed him to move in with me, which I am very sorry about now. After being fired, Patrick began moonlighting as a street pharmacist to make ends meet, until he was inevitably arrested by the police, which led to several months behind bars. This pattern of behavior has been characteristic of Patrick since the age of 16, and I couldn't help but feel stupid for letting him get so close to me. Everything unfolded exactly as expected. 4 months before the expiration of the lease, he was detained and taken into custody. As the person specified in the lease agreement, I found myself responsible for paying the entire rent. Despite his repeated detentions, I showed him the courtesy and allowed him to stay with me. Unfortunately, he continued to live in prison. I hoped that he would grow up and maybe find a job similar to mine, but he still firmly believed that someday he would succeed. In short, as soon as my girlfriend's apartment lease ended, she moved in with me, and we started a new chapter of life together. As a couple, we've been living together for quite some time, but our peaceful routine was disrupted when a month later Patrick received permission for early release from prison. Surprisingly, when Patrick returned, his belongings were no longer in our shared apartment. Patrick had nowhere to go, and he turned to me with a desperate request to temporarily stay for 2 weeks until he sorted out his affairs and moved in with relatives. Given the limitations of our living space, I did not dare to grant his request. I explained to him that our 2-room apartment is already too small for me and my girlfriend, and adding another person will only aggravate the lack of space. Despite my doubts, Patrick begged me, assuring me that his stay here would be short-lived and that he had a relative to whom he could move later. But he needed time to make the necessary preparations. I told him that I would discuss this issue with my girlfriend. Later in the evening, I talked to her, and although she hesitated, she finally agreed. She had never crossed paths with Patrick before. Her knowledge of him was limited to what I shared with her. Surprisingly, he moved in the same day. However, before he settled in the apartment, I made it clear to him that my girlfriend's consent was obtained only on condition that he would stay in it for no more than 2 weeks. He agreed, ensuring that his presence would be inconspicuous for the duration of his stay. Amazingly, after a week he easily got used to the role of a commendable couch surfer. He tried not to invade our personal space, and often returned to the apartment only when we were getting ready for bed. Although we rarely saw him, we were aware of his presence, and appreciated his efforts to ensure that his belongings were collected, and did not interfere with us. Therefore, it is not surprising that we did not even notice how the first 2 weeks passed. But in the third and fourth weeks, I periodically returned home late from work, and found him watching TV with my girlfriend. And although there was nothing wrong with it, I couldn't help but find something strange about it. He knew exactly when I would come late, and it was convenient to come home early. At first, I thought he had a harmonious, friendly relationship with my girlfriend, but their communication was minimal when I was present. Despite the fact that we tried to maintain cleanliness and minimize clutter, our living space still seemed too cramped, and the apartment was constantly suffocating. The sheer number of people crammed into such a small space was simply overwhelming. As the 5th week approached, I was increasingly concerned about the fact that he had extended his stay with us beyond the promised 2 weeks. I sympathized with my girlfriend, as I assured her that Patrick would leave within 2 weeks. One evening, when we were lying in bed, I decided to discuss the situation with her. I wanted to apologize on behalf of Patrick, and relieve the tension that was in the air. Despite the fact that Patrick didn't create any problems between us, the closeness in the apartment seemed to affect our intimate relationship. For weeks have passed since our last intimacy, and I found it necessary to discuss this issue. I wanted to talk to my friend about the fact that he has been living with us for more than a month, although initially he promised to stay only for 2 weeks. I expected my friend to support me, or at least say something in response, but she just turned away and went to bed as if I was in her way. Reflecting on the situation, I remembered that for the first 3 days after Patrick moved in, we were close, but on the 4th day she began to refuse intimacy with me. Considering that my girlfriend usually behaves actively in intimate moments, I assumed that she feels awkward. During the last 3 days when Patrick was staying with us, she constantly screamed loudly during intimacy, despite the fact that she knew about the presence of a guest in the living room. I was struck by the fact that for the first 3 days after his arrival, we were in an intimate atmosphere, and it was during these days that it was unusually and absurdly loud. Its volume was such that even a neighbor from another apartment could hear it. It seemed that she was doing this on purpose, but oddly enough, starting from the 4th day, it noticeably increased my self-esteem. My girlfriend constantly refused any form of intimacy with me, often justifying the fact that Patrick is in the living room. It seemed strange to me, since she had not been so circumspect in the previous 3 days. Despite the presence of Patrick in the living room during these occasions, I did not attach any importance to it. But after 6 weeks, I still expressed my dissatisfaction to Patrick, informing him that his stay in the house was over. It bothered me that my girlfriend continued to deny any intimacy between us, because of Patrick's presence. I noticed that his presence lingered, and it seemed like a deliberate form of retaliation. Almost 2 months have passed, and she still continues to use the weak excuse that a guest lives in our apartment. I reminded Patrick that he had promised to leave a month ago, but he cunningly shifted the blame to other problems, persuaded me to extend his stay for another week. In addition, I recall numerous cases of his unexpected absence for a long time, coinciding with the unexplained absences of my girlfriend. For some time, it seemed to me that everything was going wrong. There was a case when I decided to return home early from work around 15:30 due to poor health. Knowing that my girlfriend usually comes home at 5:30 p.m., I went to the front door of my apartment and prepared to unlock it. Suddenly I felt some kind of commotion inside the apartment, which caused fear that someone had broken in, since neither Patrick nor my girlfriend is usually at home at this time. Hurriedly entering the room, I saw that the TV was on. Patrick pretended to be fascinated by the TV, but his behavior looked unusual and uncomfortable, which was noticeable to any observer. Meanwhile, the sound of running water indicated that my girlfriend was taking a shower. This unusual situation aroused my suspicions, suggesting that something illegal was going on between them. Although I had no concrete evidence, but their presence in the apartment at an untimely time was sufficient reason for doubt. In addition, I was sure that my girlfriend was not one of those people who are capable of such behavior. Having decided to sort out the situation, I asked my girlfriend a question about her early return home. In response, she explained that she had taken half a day off from work. They didn't give me a convincing explanation, and I was dissatisfied. Because of my poor health that day, I did not delve into this topic as I should have, but still I couldn't get rid of the suspicion that there was some kind of connection between them. The next day, my friend unexpectedly brought up the topic of my personal conversation with Patrick about his plans to move out. To my surprise, she acted as an intermediary on his behalf, offered me to extend the deadline for another week or even more, and not put pressure on him. Considering that we are vacating the apartment in January, but it seemed absurd to me that he used her as an intermediary to prolong his stay with us. He promised me it would only be for 2 weeks, and I think it's important for him to keep his word. I had already gone through a considerable time without my former surroundings and intimacy, and now she suddenly took his side. This situation upset me very much, and in the end, we didn't argue about it for long. Fortunately, in the end, she admitted that I was right. It often seemed to me that I was alone in my position, and I had fears that if we allowed him, he would turn into an eternal freeloader who would constantly settle on the sofa and evade his obligation to pay for housing. Sometimes I wished he was back in prison. He knows how to find trouble in the shortest possible time, and his skill lies in the fact that he himself goes to prison. It happened in November, exactly the same week that we went together in search of the perfect wedding ring. It was a carefully planned event, carefully prepared several weeks in advance. By involving her in the ring selection process, we wanted to achieve her absolute adoration and ensure that she would wear it with pride for the rest of her days. At least, that's how it was initially. We had discussed the idea of a wedding even before she moved in with me, and had been diligently planning it for the weeks leading up to this moment. Our grandiose plan called for the signing of a lease agreement for our new apartment in the day, knowing how much she loves romantic gestures. That evening, when we went to get wedding rings, we finally had the opportunity to be in an intimate atmosphere after a 7-week break. It was a special reward for buying rings, and a gentle reminder of the closeness that we lacked because of the guest in the living room. The following week only intensified my longing for the bond we shared. I took out a $4,500 loan from my $401,000 to purchase the engagement ring of her choice. To keep everything a secret and surprise her on Valentine's Day, I carefully hid the ring in a place where she could not stumble upon it. But the very next day, my girlfriend suddenly reminded me that it had been almost 2 months since Patrick started living with us. This discovery took me by surprise. In the evening I met with Patrick and firmly said that he had only 1 day to find another place to live, otherwise I would be forced to take out his things myself. He expressed his impotence by saying that he had nowhere to go, which made me very angry. I began to explain to him that it was not my concern. At that moment my girlfriend came out of the bedroom and our voices became louder. I strongly advised Patrick to stop depending on me and find a place to live or go to his family. It was obvious that the relatives did not want his presence because of his unreliability. Even his acquaintances in our social circle, who, as it turned out, were of African descent, did not want to accept him. The confrontation escalated. It almost came to a physical fight. I warned him that if he didn't leave my apartment that night, there would be consequences. I decided to contact the authorities and make sure that they would solve this problem correctly by putting him behind bars. Expressing my disappointment, I made it clear to him that his lack of gratitude deprived me of the opportunity to do him any service. He left that evening, but didn't return until the next morning to pick up his things. By the end of November, it became clear that he was gone from my life forever. There were rumors that he had found shelter in a dilapidated house about 2 miles away from me, which was not surprising given the lack of support from his acquaintances. But it struck me that he could return to Queens. It would be more expedient if he went to his relatives instead of living in a trap house, which could potentially lead him back to prison. I must admit that I am puzzled by the train of thought of the person who made such a decision. I have often wondered why he chose to stay in the area, given the lack of employment opportunities and the exorbitant costs associated with the studio where he continues his unsuccessful music career. Recently it became clear to me why he wanted to stay here so hard. This discovery took place in the first week of December. When I was in the bar with my girlfriend, I saw him leave the room unnoticed. His presence there seemed strange to me. A similar case was repeated several times and each time in different institutions, and later I discovered that my girlfriend was exchanging text messages with him. This discovery made me wonder if he was tracking our location using GPS, since he often appeared in places where we were, trying to hide from my sight. Trying to figure out this disturbing situation, I jokingly told my girlfriend about it, who admitted to me that she also found his behavior quite disturbing and creepy. I found out that she gave him the address of our location, which allowed her to secretly meet and have intimate relations with him in my car. At the same time, I waited patiently inside the establishment, completely unaware of her actions. This incident occurred during our second visit to her parents in upstate New York. The first visit was rather unpleasant because of her father's disapproving attitude towards me. My girlfriend informed me that he would prefer her to marry a man with a higher education rather than a driver like me. What he was saying was different, but his intentions were clear. In fact, I realized that this was what he wanted to convey to me. Her father, an arrogant and irritable professor at a local college, considered himself superior to me. He thought highly of himself as Einstein. He constantly lectured me, interrogated me as a suspect. I despised him. He thought his daughter deserved someone better, his beloved and pure-hearted daughter. Although I was not personally acquainted with her two older brothers, I saw their photos. Despite my girlfriend's best efforts to get her father to accept me, it became clear that we would not be able to find a common language. She wanted us to come to her parents' house before Christmas, so they could get to know me before we celebrate the holidays together. I tried my best to be polite to her parents, but unfortunately they were quite difficult to bear. They expressed a desire to visit my girlfriend and see where she lives now, but she insisted that they wait until we moved to a nicer apartment in the East Village or Lower East Side. She was afraid that if they saw the condition of our neighborhood and apartment, they would be disappointed. We were supposed to sign a lease for a new apartment in 2 weeks, a few days before Christmas. The following week, I found a notification from Patrick on my girlfriend's newly purchased phone. Not knowing about the nature of their communication, I fixed the image of the message. My predominant emotion was confusion rather than suspicion, since I had never seen in my girlfriend a person capable of betraying my trust. Before she finished taking a shower, I had a desire to capture this text as proof. While I was driving to work, my thoughts wandered, fixated on the dynamics of the relationship between my girlfriend and Patrick. My head was full of questions about his messages, with the question of the time of my departure, which led to suspicions about a possible connection between them. Memories surfaced of how she loudly demonstrated her pleasure during our intimate contacts, while Patrick lived in my apartment. I couldn't help but think about how she chose outfits when Patrick was around. The lack of intimacy, which she denied me, also left its mark on my thoughts. I remembered many cases when I unexpectedly returned home and found both of them in the house. I was thinking about his sudden appearances in various places, and about her unexplained disappearances for short periods of time. Gradually everything fell into place, and my suspicions about their affair intensified even before the end of the work shift. Throughout the day I had a feeling of my own worthlessness. Anger and confusion consumed me. I desperately hoped that my conclusions were wrong, because my whole life revolved around this woman. If it wasn't for her, I would have moved to Florida by now. My friend and his wife were trying to persuade me to join their new company and work as a driver. 3 months ago, my friend in Florida made me a tempting offer. $500 a day after taxes for the transportation of cars in a certain region of the United States. However, as my relationship with my girlfriend became closer and closer, I understood her reluctance to leave New York and her family. I made a firm decision to stay in my apartment. The same day I came across the text notification, I decided to confirm my suspicions. To do this, I decided to purchase a pair of first-class hidden high-resolution video cameras. It was planned to discreetly install them in the bedroom and living room in order to be able to remotely monitor the situation via Wi-Fi and receive information on a mobile phone in real time. Taking advantage of the evening while she was sleeping soundly, I skillfully placed the cameras in the places reserved for them. With extreme caution, I connected them to the Wi-Fi network, ensuring uninterrupted communication with the mobile device. Before leaving for work the next morning, I carefully examined the cameras, made sure that they were invisible and worked optimally. I carefully hid the cameras in strategic places, then went outside with my mobile phone, ensuring its synchronization. After that, I went to my workplace. As a rule, the girl and I have different times of going to work. She leaves at 7 in the morning and I at 5. Expecting that several days would pass before any significant events recorded by the camera would be discovered, I was stunned by the reality. Already half an hour after I left the apartment, the motion sensor of the camera worked like crazy. At that moment, I was just getting out of the subway. I stood in the middle of the station and tried to comprehend the shocking scene unfolding in front of me. At first, I thought it was my girlfriend who turned on the motion sensor, but when I looked at my mobile phone, I saw Patrick's presence on the screen. To my bewilderment, he was already in my apartment and passionately kissing my girlfriend in the living room. Passengers were briskly rushing by, not paying attention to the heartbreaking sight that I was watching. And I froze in complete bewilderment. How could this happen? Then it dawned on me that Patrick must have been hiding nearby, patiently waiting for me to leave for work. My girlfriend was standing completely naked, covered only with a white towel draped over her head. I was completely at a loss, unable to understand what kind of betrayal was unfolding before my eyes. As I zigzagged through the crowd, my leg grew weaker and weaker, and eventually I was forced to find a break at the nearest station. To my amazement, they began to perform intimate acts right on the couch in my living room. I was both surprised and fascinated by their ease and comfort. It was obvious that this affair had been going on for a long time and without my knowledge. The realization that I was late for work suddenly came over me, but I felt a strange indifference. It seemed that at that moment my life had lost all meaning. Everything I once treasured was destroyed, and I felt completely defeated. The rage in me reached a boiling point, and I was seized with an irresistible desire to take revenge on these two people. While watching the recording from the camera, my supervisor suddenly called, as a result of which the shooting was interrupted. I was annoyed by his intervention, but he questioned my lateness and warned of possible consequences if I did not come within 30 minutes. This made me skeptical and overwhelmed me, causing such strong anger that I impulsively quit my job and abruptly interrupted the conversation. When my supervisor tried to contact me again, I deliberately ignored his call until the subway was nearing its destination. Then I realized that they had already finished their business, and I thought with regret about the time it would take me to get home. I couldn't believe their audacity. While the subway train was traveling, I could not get rid of the feeling of betrayal and regret that flooded over me. My girlfriend, whom I trusted and loved, deceived me in the most terrible way. The thought that she had gone to work that morning, as usual, filled me with a bitter mixture of anger and disappointment. It was a stark reminder of how ignorant I was, not noticing the truth that was unfolding right before my eyes. Minutes passed, and the adrenaline that fueled my impulsive decision to quit my job gradually evaporated. It was replaced by a wave of regret and self-doubt. I couldn't help but scold myself for making such a stupid choice. The realization of how important my work was to me hit me like a brick. Deep down, I understood that it was useless to ask my former employer to return my job. The damage was done, and it seemed too late to save what I had lost. The weight of my mistake weighed heavily on me throughout the deserted subway ride. Before this incident, I always considered my girlfriend loyal and devoted. The thought that she might betray me never crossed my mind, and now I had to face the bitter truth that she had an affair with a man I considered my friend. Disbelief and heartache mixed together, and this subway ride became the saddest in my life. I have constantly shown kindness to these people, repeatedly helped them. Despite that even his family members rejected him, I treated him with understanding. But in response, my girlfriend and friend treated me meanly. How can I trust a girl who sleeps with my friend? The thought of proposing to her on Valentine's Day when I was returning to my apartment seemed unthinkable. Early in the morning, around 8 o'clock, I took off my work clothes and collapsed on the bed, sobbing like a helpless child. It seemed that all my successes had been erased, and I was starting everything from scratch again. I found myself in a difficult situation. I lost my job and my girlfriend, and now I am in uncertainty about where to go when the lease term ends. Moving in with my girlfriend is impossible because of our breakup, and without a better paying job I won't be able to pay for my apartment in 2 months. Finding another job seems to be a difficult task, especially when you consider that hundreds of candidates are applying for the same position. Although I have already informed my landlord of my intention to move out, I am now in a state of uncertainty. Although I didn't think long about turning to my previous employer in the hope of being reinstated, I'm sure I've already been fired. Unfortunately, even if I apologized, it would hardly save the situation, given the abundance of candidates who want to get this job. Fortunately, Florida came to my rescue. It was the only source of hope in the midst of my despair. Deciding to change the situation, I turned to my friend, who together with his wife ran a car transportation company in Florida. Although he had already offered me a driver's seat, I refused because of my girlfriend's reluctance to leave New York. But now, desperate to start over, I decided to contact my friend. Unfortunately, he did not answer my call, which made me turn to his wife, who played an important role in the business. Being the brain of the company, she maintained a website, handled accounts receivable, and answered phone calls in the absence of her husband when he was on the road. When she informed me that there was still an empty seat, she asked if I could come to Florida. I replied that I could come the next day to inspect the place. Accordingly, I was going to book a ticket to Florida the next day. I currently have $3,500 in my bank account. By returning the engagement ring today, I will receive a compensation of $4,500, which will allow me to receive $8,000. As I thought about my future, a sense of optimism grew in me. The idea of packing up and leaving without informing his girlfriend was becoming more and more attractive. Who knew my terrible situation, I was strongly recommended to choose this path. The main advice was to just leave, survive all these shocks, let go of the desire for revenge and disappear from her life forever. I'd been thinking about this idea for a long time, but it seemed too simplistic to me. The anger I felt towards both her and her lover fueled my desire for revenge, but in the end, I recognized the most important aspect of this plan, to end all this and break all ties with her, never to meet or communicate with her again. My disappearance was associated with her repeated attempts to contact me, and I longed for it all to end, and I personally saw her reaction. Surprisingly, the guys also craved completion. I spent the whole day alone in my apartment, giving enough time to think about the actions of both my girlfriend and a former friend, who also turned out to be my roommate. As a result, I came to the conclusion that the most correct retaliation would be to withhold all information about my intentions in order to tell her the news at the very last moment, when she least expects it. When I got home in the evening, I could hardly resist the desire to enter into an argument with her. In my eyes, she looked vicious, vile, and evil. It was beyond me to understand her motives for committing this betrayal. Despite the fact that I had lost all affection and desire for her, I decided to maintain a facade of indifference, pretending that I didn't know anything. That night, when I was lying next to her, restless thoughts were swarming in my head. What could have pushed her to such an act towards a man whom she confessed her love for? It occurred to me that perhaps this affair had begun only a week after his arrival, and I wondered if it served as a means to humiliate and disgrace me. She was just interested in being with a dark-skinned man. It was like eating a forbidden fruit, a kind of experiment. I couldn't think of any other reason for her action. Before we went to bed for the night, I told her that I needed to go to Florida for a 4-day business trip, as required by my company. I advised her to sign an apartment rental agreement in my absence, assuring her that I would sign an addendum to it upon my return. The leasing company has already checked our creditworthiness, and our total income was sufficient to afford this housing. She agreed to this plan. I booked a plane ticket to Florida, which turned out to be the most expensive I've ever booked. However, despite the price, it was worth it, because I just couldn't live in the same apartment with my girlfriend anymore. The thought of her cheating on me in my bed while I'm at work makes me sick. It's unpleasant to realize that my girlfriend was most interested in the departure time of my flight. I can only assume that she wanted to tell her lover the perfect time for their morning date. I can't help but wonder how long she intends to continue this affair. Having proposed to her, I thought about the future. Will our story continue in the new apartment? Will it continue after the wedding and the creation of a family? These thoughts made me grateful that I would not be around at these significant moments. Feeling depressed, I decided to take a break from her. The next morning, I informed her that I was leaving early, despite the fact that I had changed the camera position the day before to get a better view of our living room and bedroom. I took care to save a video recording of their outrages on a portable hard drive. It was almost predictable. As soon as I left my apartment, Patrick, her wasted no time entering it. Their actions started working like clockwork. Fortunately, a strategically placed hidden camera managed to capture their facial expressions, record her obnoxious loud screams, and even capture their intimate moments. Most of all, I was shocked by their complete disregard for protection. How thoughtless of her to put my life at such risk. Besides, Patrick had recently been in prison, and I wondered what diseases he could have contracted there. Being in an unstable life situation, I was afraid of a potential health risk, especially sexually transmitted diseases. Considering this, I mentally noted that upon arrival in Florida, I would definitely take tests. Just before boarding the flight, I managed to contact my friend, who told me in detail about the opportunity to work as a driver for him. Fortunately, I already had CDL rights, so it only took additional training to upgrade my skills. Of course, it will not be easy to cross the whole country behind the wheel, but I get real pleasure from driving, and the reward is almost 3 times higher than I earned before. In addition, I dream of buying a spacious house in Florida with a large backyard. In New York, where I currently spend most of my income on rental housing, such real estate will not be cheap. Despite the fact that I am not sure of the exact date of my trip, I have enough time to think about my next actions. Perhaps I should heed the advice of my friend's difficult father and return to school as soon as I have saved enough money to pay for my studies. Now everything seems uncertain and unresolved. Currently, I am overwhelmed with emotions, which prevents me from making a rational decision. I have video recordings of those 2 days in which something happened that I did not expect, and I have saved these recordings on my portable disk. The hidden camera that I used is activated by movement, that is, the recording is made only when motion is detected. The camera's memory was enough to continue recording until I returned from a 4-day trip to Florida. Arriving in Florida in the evening, I found that my friend had left for delivery and decided to take a taxi to his house. To my surprise, his wife was at home. My friend and his family live in a magnificent residence in Florida, which caused me great joy at the sight of their prosperity. We were raised together in Queens, so this achievement has become even more outstanding. Watching the grandeur of their house, I couldn't help but compare it with my small apartment in New York, which seemed comical to me. Despite this, I was optimistic about the beginning of a new chapter of my life in this place. It was during our conversation that my friend expressed his sharp disapproval of Patrick, from whom he had warned me to stay away many years ago. Unfortunately, I didn't heed his advice. Oddly enough, now I am grateful to Patrick for revealing the true nature of my girlfriend. If it hadn't been for him, perhaps someone else would have discovered her deception. Who can say? Perhaps it would have been another person of African descent. While visiting my friend in Florida in the evening, I decided to review the recordings made by my camera. To my complete shock, I saw that Patrick was in my house, eating my food, occupying my bed, and having an intimate relationship with my girlfriend on the same bed. The severity of this betrayal has become unbearable. At first, I planned to talk to her about it after she moved into a new apartment, but watching this blatant display of disrespect on my own bed pushed me to the extreme. And all this while I was in Florida. I felt completely helpless in the current situation and understood that taking the situation into my own hands would not lead to a positive result. The idea of resorting to cruelty came to my mind, but I quickly realized the possible consequences, for example, being in prison for a significant part of my life. Instead, the next day I decided to contact her father and tell him the address of my apartment. I planned to give him the keys to the apartment at night, accompanying them with videos that showed his daughter entering into an intimate relationship with a person of another race. I wanted to provoke a strong emotional reaction from him. With this plan in mind, I started making duplicate keys to my apartment the next morning. I saved and transferred the recording of their intimate meeting to a USB drive. On the same day, I sent it to her father with the help of a fast delivery service. Initially, I was going to contact her father directly, but I didn't have his contact details. Then I searched for her on the college's website, but found only the number of his office. I persistently called his office several times until he finally answered. He recognized me, and I took the opportunity to tell the truth about his daughter. I explained that she had asked me for a favor, to accompany her on a trip to relatives, while emphasizing that we do not have a romantic relationship. We were just friends with privileges. I was just one of her many lovers, the person she lives with and deals in illegal substances. I decided to tell him that, as a gesture of kindness, I had made copies of the keys to her apartment and suggested that he visit her at 8 p.m., the optimal time. I deliberately did not mention the presence of video recordings, not knowing how to explain this moment. After the phone conversation, he was silent. I assumed that perhaps he was shocked by the unexpected information I shared and was waiting for the inevitable consequences. Alternatively, he could suspect that this was a hoax, although I strongly doubted it. Perhaps this was due to the fact that I provided extensive information. I was sure that after receiving the letter, he would believe me, but I was not sure that everything would go according to plan. While doing my own business, I took the opportunity to get acquainted with the upcoming living conditions. My friend's wife kindly told me about how their business works, in fact brought me up to date. In the late afternoon my friend returned, and his family and I went to dinner. To keep calm I turned off camera notifications, but around 9 or 10 o'clock in the evening, it suddenly dawned on me. I decided to discreetly check the camera while in a restaurant with my friend and his family. Due to the sensitive nature of this story, I did not immediately tell it to my friend. Slipping out of the restaurant, I quickly checked my phone and was pleasantly surprised that it was at this moment that the revenge I was counting on towards my unfaithful partner took place. To my amazement, her father unexpectedly arrived at my apartment, accompanied by 3 young men of about 25. Assuming that these were either his sons or their friends, I mentally replayed the situation. They seemed to be caught off guard when the door opened. In the living room, my ex-girlfriend and her lover were enthusiastically watching TV, but their quiet moment was disrupted when her father and several men suddenly entered the room. Patrick, dressed in a t-shirt, was at a loss, and my ex-girlfriend hurriedly tried to hide herself by remaining in a bra and panties. The father began to shout at her, expressing his disappointment with her lies about her boyfriend. At that tense moment, as it seemed to me, I stupidly wished for a different outcome, perhaps hoping that everything would be resolved without the use of physical measures. However, my ex-girlfriend did not have the opportunity to express her opinion. Her father categorically prevented her from doing this, showering Patrick with humiliating insults, some of which are too offensive to repeat. I watched the puzzled expression on her face when her father accused her of betraying her family and demanded an explanation of her actions. Her reaction was truly priceless. She looked completely confused, not knowing where to start, and I found the situation so funny that I couldn't help laughing. Watching a frustrated, angry and arrogant father in such a state was the height of satisfaction for me. Seeing a beloved child among all the things he hated was unbearable. Her father scolded her tirelessly, spewing humiliating insults at Patrick, and seemed ready for a fight, anticipating Patrick's participation. The elderly man arrived ready for battle, as evidenced by the 3 men accompanying him. No wonder he came prepared for any outcome. But at the first opportunity, Patrick hurried away, leaving my ex-girlfriend alone. Her father unleashed a barrage of verbal insults on her. It got to the point that he almost disowned her, but did not break the family ties. And the most remarkable thing is that I captured the whole incident on video. After her father's departure, she was left in a state of shock and isolation. Overwhelmed with emotion, she called me with tears in her eyes, desperately asking when I would be back. She didn't know that I was the organizer of this whole scenario, forever spoiling the bond between father and daughter. Their relationship would never be the same again, and she had only me to blame for these irreversible changes. During our phone conversation, she expressed a desire to confess something, but could not talk about it over the phone. I advised her to wait for my return home, when she could confide in me face to face. I tried to comfort her, persuading her to stop crying and assuring her that I would return home in 2 days and look forward to hearing about her troubles. But to my surprise, the next morning she did not invite Patrick for an intimate meeting. It seemed that the fun was suddenly over. As I found out later, she had no way to contact me. Despite this, I couldn't help but smile broadly because she had created such a situation for herself. Now she will have to answer for the consequences of her actions. Later that day I received the results of an STD test, which turned out to be negative. It was on the day I was supposed to fly back to New York that she finally found out that I was the one responsible for revealing the truth. Presumably her mother informed her about the situation. When I was heading to the airport, she called me and confessed to cheating. It dawned on me that she had already put the puzzle together. She said that I went to extreme measures, secretly recorded and destroyed her family, which was not necessary. I told her how she had ruined my life, especially since I was on the verge of getting married. Somehow, she managed to discover 2 hidden recording devices, and she threatened me with a lawsuit. Upon arriving in New York, I decided to consult with my lawyer to find out if she had a valid claim. It is not known if she actually has them. As an excuse for her infidelity, she simply labeled it as a desire for intimacy. Patrick didn't matter to her at all. The way she said it looked like an attempt to downplay the significance of the situation. It seemed that she did not consider it a big problem that, by engaging in unprotected intimacy with both of us, she could infect me with a potentially life-threatening venereal disease. It was as if she expected me to just move on. I made it clear to her that our relationship was over, that everything was over between us, and that I intended to return to New York to pick up my things and then move to Florida. In response, she threatened me with legal action for violating privacy and making adult films out of revenge. But I stood my ground and told her to go to hell. The only thing I regret is that I didn't give her a chance to explain herself. I'm interested to know how their relationship with Patrick began. As far as I understand, they most likely started about a week after you moved in, but it would be great to hear the story from her point of view. I currently live in Florida, where my profession is connected with the transportation of cars in the southern regions of the country, occasionally stopping in the north. From the latest news about my girlfriend, I found out that she finally found a roommate. As for her relationship with her father, they don't keep in touch at all, since he doesn't want to know her anymore. Since then, nothing more is known about Patrick. He may have ended up in prison again. To tell the truth, I do not know and am not interested in his whereabouts. And the most important thing is that I found out that it all ended terribly for my ex-girlfriend. Her feelings after my revenge and her relationship with her family turned into severe stress. She developed psoriasis. Her whole body and face were covered with terrible rashes, which gave her not only discomfort but also self-doubt. She has always been a beautiful girl, and now men don't pay any attention to her. And I don't feel sorry for her. She caused me too much pain and suffering. And now it's time for the second story, let's listen to it. Ellie and I crossed paths when we were students, and our connection was instant. But at the beginning of our relationship, I lacked self-confidence. It was Ellie's sincere interest and her unwavering attraction to me that gradually instilled in me a sense of self-worth, allowing me to overcome self-doubt. Being a diligent and boring person, I had little contact with women, so the fact that Ellie, an incredibly smart and amazing person, showed interest in me, made me tremble. Both driven by ambition, we created our own successful businesses before we graduated from college. After graduating from college, Ellie and I created our own successful companies. We were full of excitement and anticipation. Over the years, we have built a solid foundation of love, trust, and perseverance, overcoming all the obstacles that have arisen in our path. Our journey together was not without difficulties, from heartbreaking family losses to difficult professional trials, but together, we overcame these storms and became even stronger. One aspect of our relationship that always brought me comfort was Ellie's extensive social circle. She easily found a common language with both men and women, and although there were many men around her, I never found any reason to doubt her loyalty. All our social outings were comprehensive, close friends participated in them, and I fully trusted her choice of friends. As we approached the significant 10th anniversary, our hearts were filled with a sense of joy and optimism. We couldn't wait to celebrate a decade of strong love, unbreakable unity, and unshakable trust. I decided to touch on the topic of creating a family. From the very beginning of our relationship, we came to a compromise regarding the size of our future family. While I wanted to have children, my wife spoke out for the absence of children, or at the very least, for one child. So we came to an agreement that we would have one child. 10 years have passed since the conclusion of our marriage, and I, feeling financially stable and confident in the strength of our relationship, decided that it was time to return to this topic. Reflecting on the events that unfolded after that, I can't help but wonder if my initiative of this conversation started a chain of events. A little more than 3 months have passed since this conversation took place. She informed me that she plans to spend time with friends on a fun walk. At the same time, she mentioned that she needed to relax and relieve the stress caused by my constant questions about starting a family. That evening she returned home at 4 a.m., and since then our marital intimacy has lost its spark. Throughout our relationship, Ellie has always been the initiator of intimacy. Sometimes even more often than me. This was invariable, even in those rare periods when we were busy with work. I can hardly remember a time when we didn't have intimacy for more than 5 days. But lately, I've noticed a change in her behavior. She started leaving the house more often, being overly careful with her phone and actively avoiding me. All this is completely out of character for her. This situation has been going on for about 3 to 4 weeks, which prompted me to confide in my closest friend Omar, who suggested that I think about her behavior. Gradually I noticed that she began to walk more often. It's not that I just want to trust her, but that I genuinely like to trust my wife. But now I have to trust her. With great hesitation, I decide to study her phone records and text messages, feeling guilty for invading her personal space. To my surprise, I come across evidence that recently in her social circle there was a person who turned out to be a former lover from school days before our relationship. As I delve deeper into the investigation, a lot of facts come to light. It turns out that my unwavering trust in her involuntarily led to the fact that she began to calmly hide this connection. It becomes obvious that during the party she attended a month ago, they spent the whole night together. In the process of communication, everything took an unexpected turn and they began to kiss, not hesitating to demonstrate it in front of friends, and then together slipped into the toilet. Until that moment, I was gnawed by a feeling of deep anxiety. I desperately clung to the image of the woman I thought I had married, deceiving myself at the same time. But at that moment, I was overcome with anger and sadness, especially since she seemed completely unaware of my sudden apathy. Unbeknownst to her, I stopped making any romantic gestures. I experienced a deep sense of inner catastrophe, as if my world was collapsing. Having been going through this shock for some time, I made the decision to face the situation face to face about a month ago. I deceived Ellie by telling her that I was going to visit my cousin for the weekend, who lives 3 hours away from home. But instead of going on this journey, I stayed with Omar, who helped me in the process of documenting and collecting evidence. I patiently waited for the inevitable moment when they would reveal their betrayal. And of course, she brought him to our house, to our bed. Taking advantage of the opportunity, I sneaked into the house, making my way to our bedroom. Indistinct sounds confirmed my suspicions. They were so engrossed in their actions that they didn't notice my presence in the doorway. When I reached for the phone to capture the scene unfolding in front of me, an indescribable feeling arose in my soul. It was as if something in the depths of me split, and the soul cracked with audible force. A chilling chill ran through her veins, weighing down her chest, as if a huge burden had fallen on her. Every breath began to be given with difficulty. I was suffocating from lack of air. Gradually numbness set in, and further events began to be remembered as in a fog. According to Omar, whom I brought with me as a witness, I seemed to have approached them and dragged the man off the bed by force. Omar had to step in and pull me away from him. I don't remember this moment very well, but I vaguely remember that Omar was holding me down, pinning me to the floor. After that, the typical pandemonium associated with the capture began. In response to this, I decided to cut off all contacts for 5 weeks, and at the same time resort to the services of a lawyer, preparing for the worst outcome. During this period, Omar acted as an intermediary between us, because I simply could not muster the courage to talk to her directly. However, to my amazement, Ellie contacted my family, falsely claiming that we were having difficulties. In fact, it's just ridiculous. In the end, after a 5-week break in communication, we finally met and had a heart-to-heart talk. She expressed remorse and took full responsibility for her actions. I want to make it clear that this is not my fault. Together we decided to turn to a marriage counselor in the hope of finding a way to preserve our relationship. It's hard to realize, but despite everything, my love for her remained. It pains me to admit that I despise myself for genuinely caring about her happiness and general well-being. This situation made me doubt the foundation of our relationship. Could it be that she was unfaithful before, and I just didn't notice it because of my boundless trust in her? I am providing this information for further understanding. Taking a weekend to think, I came to a firm decision. It became clear to me that continuing a relationship with her would undermine my self-esteem. Besides, I didn't want to be in a situation where I constantly have to expect betrayal. So I made the difficult choice to end it all. Here's how it happened. On Monday morning I was struck by an unexpected sight. My body reacted in a way it hadn't reacted since I found out about Ellie's cheating. My body seemed determined to end this chapter and start over. Oddly enough, I found entertainment in this situation, which made Omar and his wife worry about my mental state. Having gathered my strength, I prepared for this day and contacted Ellie's father to arrange a conversation. We agreed to meet shortly before the planned marriage consultation. Despite my inner turmoil, an unexpected sense of calm accompanied me during the trip. In the end, we stopped at a charming cafe not far from his house and took our seats. Ellie's father is an admirable man, known for his cheerful disposition, sense of humor, and reasonableness. I expressed my gratitude to him and his wife for their kindness and attitude towards me over the years, and also apologized for the upcoming conversation. With great patience, he listened attentively as I explained the reasons for my decision to terminate the marriage with his daughter. As I spoke, I noticed that a hint of disappointment and anger flashed across his face, directed not at me but rather at Ellie. Despite this, he assured me of his understanding, and I asked him to keep this conversation secret, as I intend to resolve this issue with Ellie personally. Without hesitation, he agreed. At the end of the conversation, we shook hands, and he sincerely wished me all the best in my future endeavors. The pain of having his image of her destroyed was overwhelming. I considered asking him to take care of her, but reassured myself that, as a father, he would fulfill this role himself. I wasn't supposed to be her guardian anymore. She became an independent woman. With these thoughts in mind, I went to a prearranged marriage consultation. I spent the whole Sunday rehearsing what and how I would tell Ellie. I tried to ensure that emotions did not overwhelm me during our conversation. After a while, I found myself sitting in the parking lot and doing something I hadn't done for a long time. Praying. When the session started, I couldn't help but notice that Ellie was wearing one of those dresses that once captured my heart. Fleetingly, I almost lost my head from nostalgia, but in less than a few minutes, a wave of disgust and rage overcame the remnants of attraction. Resigned, I allowed the consultant to act the same way as during previous meetings. But after enduring their monologue for about 10 minutes, I felt compelled to intervene. Breaking the silence, I said, "I'm sorry. I have a few important things to tell Ellie, and I think it's better to do it in the presence of an unbiased third party. If I am interrupted during this conversation, I will respectfully terminate it. Ellie, I've recently come to some realizations that I think I need to share with you. I don't need to know if it was an isolated incident or if the betrayal took place repeatedly, because it doesn't change my point of view. The duration or frequency of infidelity will not affect my attitude to the situation in any way, regardless of the alleged excuses. Regardless of the reasons behind it, the indisputable truth is that you have changed. That's what matters to me right now. It's quite obvious that you never had any intention of starting a family with me." When Ellie started interrupting, I started backing towards the door, forcing her to quickly retreat. "You plan to deceive me for the time being, and eventually betray me." At that moment, tears began to flow down her face. "Your actions have made me feel incredibly disrespected and unloved." When the consultant's expression hinted at an impending interruption, I instinctively moved closer to the door, effectively ending further conversation. "It is very important for you to understand that my lawyer has already started the divorce application process, and your father is now fully aware of the whole truth about our situation. Please refrain from further contact with me. From now on, we will communicate only through our legal representatives." With these words, we conclude our communication. Goodbye. With that, I reached the door and left. As soon as I slammed the door behind me, I was greeted by the piercing sound of her heartbreaking sobs. She hurried out of the office, desperately trying to intercept me. Apologies and requests to give another opportunity fell from her lips. She expressed her desire to start a family with tears in her eyes. Her upset state was noticeable throughout. Despite all her efforts, I managed to slip past her and get into the car. The feelings I'd been suppressing suddenly surged up, threatening to overwhelm me, and I barely kept my composure. In search of solace, I got to my parents' house and sent a pre-prepared message to the spouse of Ellie's closest friend. When I came home, my father was not there, but my mother sensed my troubles sensitively. For some time now, she has an amazing ability to understand me to the end. Trying to reveal something important, I asked for the presence of both her and Dad, and we gathered, patiently waiting. As a result, Dad joined us after about 30 minutes. I told everything, and with every word it seemed to me that a huge sea of emotions was splashing out on me, and all the suffering that was in me was pouring out. When I finished talking to Dad, he just hugged me and I cried into his for 20 minutes. When everything was quiet, I felt completely drained, but at the same time surprisingly calm. I made an agreement with Omar that he would finally get the Harley motorcycle he had been dreaming about for so long. He was a wonderful friend to me, and I want to express my gratitude by becoming an equally good friend to him. I can't wait to see the look on his face when he gets the bike. Alice and I divorced soon after, and she looked terribly bad in court, both physically and emotionally. She crawled to me on her knees asking